Bibles, turn to the book of Nehemiah. We'll be still probably still in chapter 1, may finish chapter 1 up today. Yesterday we picked up where Nehemiah talked about it came to pass in verse 4. Look at verse 5. It's page 704 in the Rock of Ages Study Bible. So in verse 5 it says, I said, so now we're getting to, we see the progression in verse 4 of his emotions and prayer, and a proper progression of emotions there, and that shows to us that it was genuine, that it was real, that he had genuine concern for them. I thank God for those that you can go to and ask them to pray about something, and then and they tell you they're going to pray and they mean it. As I said, our pastor up in West Virginia, when we were there, one of the things I admired about him and loved about him so much was that he would pray for you. And before he became our pastor, we would see him every so often here and there, and every time he would ask you about the prayer request that he had talked about before, and he knew all the details of it. And I thought, there's no way he could remember all those on the spot, in the moment, right there, standing there in front of you in a parking lot or in a Walmart or somewhere like that. There's no way he could do that and recall all of it if he hasn't been spending time in prayer. It just doesn't come natural to be able to do that. I understand, some people with a photographic memory, but that's not what was going on there. And here, he's been concerned for his country and for his people and for the children of God and the nation of Israel, and seeing them to turn back to it. And then in verse 5 it says, he tells us what he prayed, and said I beseech thee, O Lord. That part there of I beseech thee, O Lord, but especially the I beseech thee part, it's meant to have great emotion with it. It's when you're at a point there where he was praying as if he expected. It means, oh now, exclamation point. Now, I beseech thee. He's asking God, do something now. Yeah. God, make a change. And yet we know that it was 4 months before he had a chance to even make progress with the king about these matters. For 4 months. Was God doing nothing? No, God was doing something. God was preparing his heart. God was bringing him to a place that when he stood before a king, it showed. It showed on him. When you spend that much time with God, it'll make the difference. It'll show. When you go in, you're trying to witness to people, you're trying to reach somebody in your neighborhood or in a family, your family members or something, and you spend that much time with God in preparation for it, will show when you're dealing with them. It'll come out. It'll be very evident. We know that. We know that it was. Look at verse 11. It says, O Lord, I beseech thee, let now thine ear be attentive to the prayer of thy servant, and to the prayer of thy servants who desire to fear thy name and prosper. Again, this shows his understanding of Scripture, but he had a desire to fear God's name and to prosper. I pray thee, thy servant this day, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man, for I was the king's cupbearer. And it came to pass in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him, and I took up the wine and gave it unto the king. Now I had not been before time sad in his presence. Wherefore the king said unto me, why is thy countenance sad? Think about this. How did the king notice him on that? Well, one, he was cupbearer. He was around him all the time. But he was obviously not a servant that the king just kind of dismissed. that may go to the position of him some, and it may go to to show you the king who is on point, paying attention, and things of that nature. But I think it also speaks of God's servant Nehemiah and how faithful he was to serve, how diligent he was to serve, how serious he took his opportunities as a child of God to do whatever it is that God had for him. But Nehemiah, he waits for this 4 months, and God prepares him for that, and the king notices. We'll see. He notices it instantly. Wherefore, in chapter 2, verse 2, wherefore the king said unto me, why is thy countenance sad, seeing that thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then was I very sore afraid. He realized, see, he wasn't even trying to set up the encounter. He wasn't trying to manipulate or maneuver anything. He was just being faithful in prayer, waiting on God to do something, because he knew God would do something at some point. And in being faithful, God brought him past that, and in the moment in which his countenance was fallen, and the king took notice. And God starts working on the king's heart. I'll come back into chapter 1 in just a minute. Let me say this. I admire his determined view of authority. I admire Nehemiah's determined view of authority. I've often said Nehemiah is one of those guys that, had I been alive in his day or he was alive in my day, I would like to have the opportunity, to be afforded the opportunity to be around him and just warmed by the fire, so to speak, glean, learn, listen, ask questions. Nehemiah, he had a determined view of authority. We know that before he spoke to the king, he prayed to the king of Kings, and asked that God would show him favor in the sight of the king. And then he allowed God to just do what God wanted. I wonder how many times he prayed, God, give me favor in the sight of the king. And then one day, not knowing, but God used his countenance to deal with the heart of the king. Artaxerxes was not a weak man. Artaxerxes was not a man that was timid, or if you study him in history, he was not a man who would have been necessarily considered to be a fearful man, or a fearful man. But yet, when he goes into his presence, and the king sees him, the king is stirred. I would say that it was because he had a determined view of authority that, you let leaders lead. He had a determined view that you allow, let me say this. Because you see him praying to the King of Kings before he talks to the king, it recognizes that God is the ultimate authority, and that shapes how he deals with all other authority in his life, with the utmost respect, the utmost care, the utmost diligence. I think it's because of his view of authority that he served so faithfully, so well, so diligently, and in doing so, the king was quick to want to help him. Look at verse 3, and said unto the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad, when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? Then the king said unto me, for what dost thou make request? So I prayed to the God of heaven. Can you imagine that? I mean, he's either praying in the moment, praying quietly in the moment, right as he's getting ready to answer the king, or he recused himself or something. He backed out. He stepped out away for a moment and prayed. I don't know. Tend to think he probably did it in the moment. But he rightfully went to the God of heaven and prayed to him. But there had to be something about his daily walk with God and his daily service as a servant of the king that impacted this king. It says in verse 5, "And I said unto the king, if it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me unto Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchre, that I may build it. And the king said unto me, the queen also sitting by him, for how long shall thy journey be? And when wilt thou return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time." Can I say it was his proper view that put him in a place, his proper view of authority and his proper view of responsibility that put him in a place to have a position that would give him the persuasion that would allow God to use that to affect the king's heart. And then yet the king obviously appreciated this man so much he wanted him to come back. And he did something that I think is often a lot of people don't like. He asked him for give me a deadline, give me a schedule, set a time. Most people don't like that. A calendar is a scary thing to a lot of people. A schedule is an intimidating thing because it comes with it responsibility. It comes with it a sense of not only responsibility, but let me say this: keeping a schedule, it's like it's the greatest enemy to sluggard, to being a sluggard, or to being slothful in not only your time but your attitude towards things. The king asked him, and he had no problems in doing it. It was just a normal transaction, a normal thing, a normal conversation. And God used that greatly to allow the beginning, the preparations to be made to rebuild the walls. I thank God that Nehemiah had the testimony that God could use his testimony to change the heart of the king. We'll get into the rest of chapter 1 later. Just felt led to go that direction with it. But we'll pick back up and we'll break down some of the other verses of chapter 1 later. Give us a verse of a song and we'll be dismissed, and we'll pick up on it later. I don't want to try to do any more of that yet.
Do that first. That's the only